Hey, what's up everyone? Welcome to the next video in this ongoing series related to introducing the Java programming language for beginners. Now in the first two videos I just went over the major concepts and the primitive data types as well as the operators that we will use inside of our Java code. Now for today I want to go over our first few basic Java programs, and to do that we're going to open up the Eclipse environment and get started using it. So once you open up Eclipse you should see a window similar to this. And the first thing we want to do is create a new project, and to do that we're going to go over on the left hand panel here to this package explorer. We're going to right click the background, go to new, and select Java project. And the first thing we have to do is give it a name, so in this case I'll name it Hello World and hit enter. And now we have a folder that's going to contain all of our class files for this project that we're going to write today. Now if I click this arrow, it drops down these two items, and the bottom one, JRE System Library, we don't really need to be concerned with, at least for now. So if we go to this source folder, we're going to right click it, go to new, and select file. And now we need to give a name for our first file, which is actually going to be the name of our first class. So in this case I'm just going to go ahead and actually name it first class.java. So I'll put a little comment at the top, the double slash, and then say this is our first Java program dash hello world. And now we really need to open with our class declaration. So to do that we're going to type public class. The name of our file or the name of our class is first class, and we want to make sure to keep the same capital letters where they are. So first class, you don't need the .java extension. You want to open with a curly brace and then hit enter. And now one of the nice features that Eclipse does for us, it inserts this closing brace automatically for us. And it also indents the next line, which helps to keep all of our code nice and structured and much more easy to read. So now if we make another line just to make sure everything's a little more readable for us, we can create our main method, and to do that we're going to type public static void main capital S string open and closing bracket and then args, which stands for arguments, and we'll see how that gets used at a later time. But we hit enter, and again it inserted the closing brace that pertains to this. And if you ever get confused, you can see when I go right next to it with the cursor, it highlights the opening one. And again, if I was to go up to the top and go just outside this one, you can see it highlights this closing bracket as well. So Eclipse already is a pretty powerful tool, and it's helping us to structure our code much more easily than it would if we were typing on, say, just plain Notepad. So now inside of our main method, we're going to create a string variable. And so I'll type string. We'll give it a name. In this case we'll just say message. And we'll assign it a value. In this case we're going to make a string, say hello Java. And now we want to finish with a semicolon at the end. And so we've created a string object. We've given the variable a name, in this case message, although you can make this whatever you want. And then we've assigned it a value, in this case a string that says hello Java. And now we finish with a semicolon, which is the same thing that we would do in English when we finish a sentence with a period. You're going to finish your lines in Java with a semicolon. So now on the next line, we want to print some information out. So what we're going to do is type system.out.println. The first letter S in system is capital. And since this println is a method, we open set of parentheses. We're going to assign a string literal, so we're going to do double quotation marks. And again, Eclipse is automatically closing the quotes, and it closed that parenthesis for us. And now we want to put something in here, so we'll just say hello world, and then finish the line with a semicolon. And under that, we're going to type system.out.println again. And inside the parentheses, rather than specifying something in between quotes, we're going to put this variable, message, and finish the line. Now, if we hit Control S, it's going to save this for us. And if we go over here and right click on our first class.java, we go down to Run As and select Java Application, it's going to run that program for us, and we should get this console window to open up, and it should say Hello World, Hello Java, just as it does here. And what this pertains to is this line here, printing out this literal string, and then this one is printing out this variable, which actually says Hello Java in it. And so there you've created your first Hello World program. But now we're going to get started with using some of those primitive data types that we had learned about in the previous tutorials. So if we go to the default package here, we're going to right click on it, we're going to go to New and select File again, and this time we're just going to name our file MyPrimitives.java and hit enter. And now this is a separate class file, but this is also going to be its own standalone program. So it's actually going to have its own main method once again. We'll start with our comments, so // and we'll just say a basic demonstration of the primitive data types in Java. So now we want to make our class declaration. To do that again, we do public class. The name of our file, or the name of our class again, is MyPrimitives. So we'll do MyPrimitives, open curly brace again, hit enter. And now our main method, public static void main, capital S string, open and closing bracket, args, and then opening curly brace. And now we just want to make a series of variables for us to use in this program, one for each of the primitive data types, and also one string. So we'll start with the string. We'll name this variable name. We'll make it initially set to whatever you want. In this case, I'm going to put my name. You can put your name. You can put anything that you really want. And then close with the semicolon. Now we want to use an integer. So to do that, we're going to use int. And you can see it's purple here, which indicates that it is a keyword inside of the Java language. And now we want to name this variable. In this case, I'll name it weight. And we'll assign it a value, 170 in this case. Now, after the semicolon, I'm going to put a little comment for myself, and I'm just going to say this is weight in pounds, lbs, and then hit enter. And now underneath it, we want to make a double value this time, a decimal. So we type the keyword double, and again, it's purple to indicate. And we want to give it a name, so we'll just say height in this case, and we're going to assign this, let's just say 72.2, and hit the semicolon, and again another comment, and we'll just say this height is measured in inches. Now I'm being very verbose, but the point of it is to show you why comments can be important. If you were to come back to this file at a much later time, or even give it to somebody else in a group project or your teacher, and they had to read it, they could easily come down here and see these numbers, but they wouldn't necessarily know what they pertain to. But if you put a comment, you can say, well, this is in inches, and they would say, oh, okay, this is in inches, and they understand exactly what you intend to do with your code. So the next thing we want to make is a Boolean value, and I'm going to name this status, and I'm just going to set this one equal to true to begin with. And if you remember, we said Booleans can take on two values. They can either be true or they can be false. Now technically they can take on another value which is called null, but we'll get into that a little bit later on. So we want to say what this actually does, because taken out of context, we don't know what this flag is going to be used for later on. So this can serve as a little reminder to us or to somebody else, again, who reads our code. And we'll say this is this person a student with a question mark. And so now if it's set to true, we can assume that this person is a student, or if it's set to false, that they're not. And we might need to know that later on to perform some kind of a function or an operation inside of our code. And finally, we'll make a character type. So we'll do char, and we'll call this one letter grade. And we'll assign this a value. Now, when you use characters, you use a single quote, and we'll assign a capital letter A. Now if I went back and I tried to put more than one character, you can see it gives me a little error, and I'll just hover over that and it says invalid character constant. Characters can only represent a single character, whereas a string is a series of characters nested between double quotation marks. So I'll just put a little note here that said these values can be A, B, C, D, F, and I for incomplete. And these would pertain to letter grades that you might get in a class in school. So now let's start printing these out, and to start with I'm going to type system.out.println, a string literal which just says name. I'm going to put a colon, space, and now I want to put a plus sign, and I'm going to type the word name lowercase and finish the line with a semicolon. Now I'm going to hit Control S, and I just want to point out that here we're printing out this string literal that says name, but then we're putting a plus, and this does not pertain to the same plus that we would use in math where you would add two numbers. This is what is known as concatenation, and what we're doing is we're appending or adding to the end of this string whatever this value is. In this case, we're going to add my name to the end of it. So I'll put a little note at the end that says this plus is called concatenation, and we'll see exactly what it does now by running it. So Control S, if you go to My Primitives, right click, go down to Run As, and select Java Application again, you can see down in the console that it prints out name and then my name. And this is similar to what we did in the first class with the Hello World program, but we actually added this little concatenation step. So we're going to continue down and print out a little more information, and this time I'm going to change a little bit, and we're going to do system.out.print, but we're not going to put println as we have been doing, just print, and we'll see what that does in a minute. So first we want to put height, the colon, a space. We're going to close the double quote. We're going to concatenate again and add the variable height, and now another plus for concatenation. Open our double quotes again, a space, comma, space, and now we just want to finish that line. Now on another line we're going to do system.out.print once again without the ln, and we're going to do wait inside of the double quotes, and we just fix this, concatenate and add our wait variable, and now we want to finish that line. And so I'm going to stop here, I'm going to hit Control S, and we're going to run it to see exactly what's happening. So if I run, I go to Run As, and we can see that we printed out the name as we had before, and now we have height 72.2, comma, which is on this line, and then rather than going to a new line, which happened between name and height, it actually prints the next line on the same line on the output. And that's because we didn't do print line, we just did print. And this ln specifies that we want a new line and we want to do the carriage return as well. So when you get here, the ln specifies go down to the next line and go to the beginning, where here we left it out. And so if we were to actually go down and type our next system.out, and we'll go back to the println, and in this case we want to print out, is this person a student, question mark, and we'll put a space, and then we'll concatenate, and we'll just add the status in here, finish with the semicolon, and now we're going to hit Control S again. We're going to go here, and this time we're actually going to use this little green play symbol. And if I hit this down, you can see all of these classes that we've run. MyPrimitives is at the top, so that's the last one we've actually run. So if we just hit this play button, it actually runs the code for us. So that's an alternate way than just going right click to run as Java application. So now we can see that we got this string at the end here on the same line, which is probably not what we wanted. And the reason I did this is to show you not only the difference between this print and println method, but also to show you that we can use something called an escape character, which is the \n. And now if we hit Control S, I'll show you what it does. We can hit this play again, and it moved that down to the new line. So this little \n is a special thing that Java can do to escape the string that it's in and do some kind of function or whatever we want it to do. And the N stands for new line. So it's before it's printing here, it's putting it on a new line, and then it's printing out this value. So again, if we had done that up here, concatenate \n, Control S, and we'll run it, we can see that now we have another line here because there's one and another new line as well. And there's a few of these that you can use. The backslash can be used with the T to insert a tab. So if I run that, now it's tabbed over. And let's say we wanted to make the word person surrounded by double quotes. Well, if I had done this inside of the string, it's going to give us an error. And the reason is it's expecting this to be a variable, and it's expecting concatenation like this. But that's not what we want. And the way to actually display these quotes, you have to escape them. So what we're going to do is we're going to put a backslash before the quote, and then a backslash before this quote. And once we do that and run it, now we have these double quotes around the word person. So this is actually escaping this string and saying, we don't want this to be interpreted as a Java code instruction. We want this to be printed out inside of this string itself. So there we have some of the basic use of the primitive data types that we've used. And now we're going to get into a little bit of basic arithmetic where we add and subtract some values. So to do that, I'm going to open up actually an entire new class. So we're going to go to our default package again. We want to right click. We want to go down to we want to go to New, File, and we'll specify a name for this. Let's just say MyArithmetic.java. Hit enter. And we'll say Intro to Mathematical Operations. My spelling is off a little bit today, sorry. And so we'll start with our class declaration, public class MyArithmetic. We want to open the curly brace. Now we want our main method again, so public static void main string args. And so the first thing we want to do is create some variables with integers, and then we want to add them together. So I'll just make a little comment section that says this represents basic addition. And so now we need an integer. We'll say a, comma b, semicolon. And now we want another integer called sum. And what I've done here is created my variables and named them. So this is a and b, which are of the type int, and another one I've named sum, which is also of the type int. But I haven't assigned any of these actual values. So to begin with now, I want to assign a to some value, let's say 8, put the semicolon. B, we want to assign to a value, let's say 5 in this case. And now we want to assign some value to sum, particularly the sum of a and b. So we're going to say sum is assigned a plus b, semicolon. And once again, if we double click on these variable names, you can see it links up easily in Eclipse with their occurrences. So we can see easily where we declared it and where it gets used within this file. If I double click B, we get the same thing, and sum, same thing. So now we'll just print it out to show system.out.println, and I want to say A is concatenate A, system.out.println, B is, and then concatenate B. And now we want to say system.out.println the sum of, and let's break out and concatenate again. Concatenate. And this is really just repetition to get you used to what's going on when we concatenate or add things in with strings, because you're going to be using these system.out.println statements quite a bit inside of your code. So the sum of A and B is, and now we want to put in sum, and now we'll hit Control S to save. We'll go to MyArithmetic, right click, run as, Java application, and we have A is A, B is B, which is 5, and the sum of 8 and 5 is 13, which is true. So now, the reason that I did all of this, rather than saying 5 in here and 8 and 5 within the string itself, is because what happens if I want to go ahead and change this to 10 and 7? Well, if I had hard-coded it into all of these, I would have to manually go back and change all of them. So by using these variables and using them within the strings, they will automatically update whenever I change them once up here. So now if I run this again, 10 and 7, and it's 17. So now we can just change the value once in each of these lines, and it updates for all of these that we've used it in. So now I just want to show you something else, though. If we had done system.out.println, and in this case we had said the sum of A and B is plus A plus B. Well, in this case, this instruction looks very much like what we did here to add the value and store it in sum. So you would expect this to store, in this case, 17. But if we hit Control S and now we run it, well, it's saying the sum of A and B, the sum of 10 and 7, is 107, which is definitely not true. It should be 17. So what's happening here? Well, if you see 10 and 7, what we're doing is what we had referred to previously as concatenation. So all we're doing is saying at the end of this string, append the value of A, and then append after that the value of B, 10 followed by 7. And that's not what we want. So if we had used our parentheses, which we use in math a lot of the times to specify associativity, we can associate A plus B as a mathematical operation, and then the result of this would be concatenated to the end of this string. So I'll go ahead and save it and run it once again, and this time we get the correct value of 17. So you have to be careful when you're concatenating that you either use parentheses to associate things together, or just do this instruction outside of it and then use it the way we did here. And you can really never use too many parentheses, so you just want to be sure to use them wherever you can. So in this case, we could have done this, just to be certain that we're going to get what we want. So now I'll say end addition. And now let's open up, this section is subtraction. And now we'll make some more integer values. We'll do int m, and this time I'll just assign it right on the same line. Let's make this one 25, and another integer n, let's equal to 9. And now integer difference, and this is just to show you some of the various things that you can do. We could have assigned this on one line, or actually, I'll go back and I'll assign all of this on one single line, which is possible. Now we don't need to keep rewriting int. In this case, these are all going to be integer values. So int m equals 25, comma, n, which is a new variable, is equal to 9. And then yet another variable called difference, and we'll assign this equal to nothing. So can I do null? No, because it's an integer value. Sorry about that. So now we'll just specify difference. Now we want to set difference equal to, let's say, m minus n. And again, just to ensure the associativity and make it a little more clear for you, we'll put the parentheses around. And we have the difference of m minus n is stored into this variable called difference. So once again, we'll just system.out.println, and we'll print out the value difference, save it, and now let's rerun it, and the difference of 25 minus 9 gives us 16, which again is true. So let's be a little more verbose. We'll just say the difference between our first value is m and n, sorry, concatenation n, is equal to concatenation, finally, difference. We'll run it once again just to make sure it looks the way we want. The difference between 25 and 9 is equal to 16. So now we can end subtraction section, and you can see I'm using my comments to break up my code a little bit, and you can always wipe these out after you're done with everything, but this can help you as you're developing your program, at least at first. And let's make a new section. We'll call this multiplication. And let's make some new variables here. In this case, we're going to do some double values. So let's do double. We'll do 4.4. I'm sorry, I didn't give it a name. Double x equals 4.4. And double y is equal to 2.2. So now we're going to make a double. We'll call this the product. And we'll set this equal to x times y. Now, we could easily have had these right next to each other, but I like to space everything out. It makes it much more easily read, but you can do whatever feels comfortable to you. And now let's just print out system.out.println the product of concatenate x and concatenate y is, and now we just want to put our variable products. So if I do Control S to save again, we're going to go up here, we'll run it. The product of 4.4 and 2.2 is 9.680001. And so we've taken two double values, multiplied them, and stored them in a product. Now what happens if we change this to an int? Now even though we have two decimals, what this is saying is, if we highlight over this error, type mismatch cannot convert from double to int. And it's saying you're getting a double value, but you're trying to store it into an integer value, which doesn't handle decimal points, so it's giving us that error. Now there's something else that we will start using a little bit later on, but I'll just briefly introduce it now, and this is what is known as casting. So if we went ahead and did this, and we put int in parentheses here at the beginning, we're specifying that whatever the result of this operation is, we want to automatically just make it into an integer value. So if I save and run this, if we notice here, we got 9.688 whatever. But now when we run it this time, we're just going to get 9. And so what it did is it automatically cut off whatever the decimal was. So if you're not really concerned with the decimal and you don't need to handle rounding, if you do something like this, you can ensure that you're going to get an integer result through what is known as casting. So I'll just put a little note, and you can put this so that you can refer back to it later on. The use of int is called casting. So we'll just end multiplication section, and now we'll move on to the next section. Let's just do division is basic. Let's use the modulus operator. So we'll do modulus, aka remainder operation, and let's make some variables here. We'll do integer called num1, and we'll set this equal to 25. And we'll make another integer called num2, and we'll set this equal to 4. So now normally if we did division, 4 goes into 25 6 times. The result of 6 times 4 is 24, so the remainder would be 1. So now we're going to make integer value called remainder, and we're going to assign it to this number 1, percent number 2, and now system.out.println, the remainder operation results in, and let's just put our remainder variable there, Control S, and we'll run it. The remainder operation results in 1, which is exactly what we expected. So we can quickly add in division here if we wanted to do int division equals, we'll do num1 divided by num2, and we can say, and now I'm just going to use a quick shortcut in Eclipse, and instead of writing out this system.out.println every single time we use it, what you can do is type the letters SYSO, hold Control and hit spacebar, and it will automatically output the system.out.println. So this will save you a lot of typing in the long run if you start to use this, but just understand what you're using and what you're doing with it. There are a lot of these shortcuts in Eclipse, and I'll kind of go over them as we start to use each one. But I want to introduce the code with you first, and that's why I didn't really show it to you until now. So again, that is SYSO, Control Space, and it will fill out that line for you. Now this will only do the println method, not the regular print statement that we had used in the previous example. So now we want to say the division results in division. And so those two statements combined, we can say division results in 6, and then the remainder is 1. Now, there's plenty more arithmetic that we can use, but for now we're just going to leave it at the simple operations that we've used so far. And so finally, I guess we'll just put together one more quick class, and we'll right click on our package, we'll go to New, File, and let's just call this BillCalculator.java, and we'll start to put a lot of this together, and we'll just say calculate a total bill based on a list of items. So let's say you went to a stationery store or something and you bought a few items and you had to tally your total, and then you wanted to add to it the tax that you owe and then print out the end result or the final total that you would owe. That's what this program's going to do. So we'll start with our class declaration, public class, the name is BillCalculator, opening curly brace, and now our main method, public static void main string args. And now we want to make a series of variables, so we want to figure out exactly what we need. And so let's make a list of the items we're going to have with their prices. And for that, since we're using currency and we can have change involved, we're going to use double values. So we'll make double, and we'll say pens equal, let's say they're $4.99 for a pack of pens. Now, I could do a semicolon and put on a new line, double, whatever the next item is, but rather than repeating myself, let's just put a comma, and instead of putting it on the same line, let's hit enter, and since we haven't put a semicolon yet, this is technically all could be written on the same line, but to break it up and make it more legible for ourselves, we're just going to put it on a new line. So now, the next item, let's say paper, is equal to, let's say $8.99 for a pack. And I'm just going to space this out so that it all lines up nicely. Let's say the next item is a mug, and we'll say it's $6.50. Our comma again. The next one, let's say they sell some gum, and it costs 75 cents each pack. And finally, let's say they sell some water bottles, and we'll make that $2.25 each. Now we're done with all of our double values, so we're going to put our semicolon here. And now we can put a little comment that says these items represented by price in dollars dot cents. So now we need to handle tax. So we're going to have, and this is something new, the final keyword. This is going to be a double value, and we're going to put in all caps the name of our variable. Here is going to be the tax rate, is going to be 0.0735. And I'll go over this now. The final keyword means that this variable, whatever the value is, won't ever change and actually can never be changed. And I'll just demonstrate really quickly. If we tried to change that here, tax rate, and let's say we just tried to make it 0.55, it's going to give us a little error here on the underline. If we hover over it, it says that this final local variable tax rate cannot be assigned. So we want to undo that. And this pertains to a 7.35% tax rate. And if you remember from math, if we have this decimal value and we multiply it by 100 to get the percentage, you can see 7.35 is the percent value. So now we just need a few more variables. We want to do double. We have a subtotal. Subtotal. We'll initially set it to 0. We also have our tax charge, which is going to be how much tax is charged once we calculate it. And then finally we have our overall grand total, which we'll also set to 0.0. So now let's go through some statements. We want to tally up our subtotal. So to do that, we're going to write subtotal plus equal assignment tally pens 2. And here we've taken our variable subtotal, we've done our plus equal assignment, and we've run a method here called tally that takes 2 parameters. We're sending it the value of pens, which is a double, and a quantity here. So we'll say this initiates the tally method which we will define below. So we haven't defined it yet, and that's why we're getting this little error. But this is going to be our first custom method that we will write. And again, we're going to add to that subtotal plus equal. We'll do tally again. We'll say paper 1. And just to clarify the plus equal, I'll show you what we really could be doing, which is subtotal equals subtotal plus tally. Let's say we want to get 1 mug. So what we're saying is assign to the variable subtotal whatever the current value of subtotal is plus whatever the result of this operation is. But rather than doing all of that, we're just shortening it by using this nice little plus equal feature, which says the same thing. So essentially, we could rewrite this as subtotal equals subtotal plus tally mug 1. And okay, let's do 2 more. Let's do subtotal plus equals tally the gum, and we'll get 3 packs of gum. And finally, plus equals tally water, and let's get 4 bottles of water because we're thirsty. So now we need to go ahead and create our method called tally. Well, you can just follow along because we're going to explain this at a later tutorial, but we need to make this method actually declared as static. So we're going to do public static. We want it to return some kind of value. Specifically, we want it to return a double value. So we're going to specify the return type, double. And now we need to write the name of our method here, which is tally. And in between the parentheses, we're expecting it to take 2 different parameters. Water, which is technically of type double, and this number here, which is a quantity, but this is an integer value. So we need to say double item, and we'll say int quantity. Now, these values are completely arbitrary, and we just want to name them based on what we expect and to help us understand what this is doing at a later time. So you can notice already it's giving us this little error, and if we highlight over it, Eclipse tells us what it thinks is going on. In this case, it's saying you need to add a return statement. It needs to return a type double. And we'll add that in a minute. But if you want, you can just use this little link here and automatically use the quick fix. So add return statement. And notice it's arbitrarily picking some quantity to return. In this case, the actual keyword quantity that we had used as a variable. But that's not what we want to return. What we want to do is take whatever the item cost is. So item. Let's make a double called result. And we'll make it equal to item times quantity. And now we're going to return result. Now we could have done this in one line, and I'll show you that a little later in a different method. But what this is doing is it's taking whatever we sent it here, item. So I'll use the pens example. $4.99 is being sent into here. And a quantity, in this case, the number 2. So we're multiplying $4.99 times 2, storing it in result, and now we're returning whatever the value of result is. And here it's being stored inside of subtotal. Now the next time we run it, we're sending paper, which is $8.99. That becomes the new item value. Quantity is 1 in this case. So $8.99 times 1 is $8.99. We're returning $8.99, but we're actually adding it to the previous subtotal. So now 499 times 2 is, I believe, 998, and we're going to add to that 899, and we're going to keep doing that for each item, and that will equal our subtotal. So the next thing we want to do is start to calculate, once all of this is done, our tax. So once we're done adding up our items to our subtotal, we need to calculate the tax, and to do that we're going to say tax charge is going to equal calculate tax, and we're going to make another method, and we're going to send it subtotal and our tax rate. And again, we have this error. The method calculate tax of type double double as a parameter is undefined for the type BillCalculator. And one of the quick fixes is here, so I'll go ahead and click it, and you can see that it creates this method for us. In this case, it labels it private, static, the return type is double, and then the name of the method is calculate tax. It takes in two parameters, a double called subtotal, another double called tax rate. And I'm just going to change this to tax rate. And rather than putting this on two lines the way we did here, what we can simply do is just return subtotal times the tax rate that is specified. And really quickly, I want to explain the concept of local variables. Now, tax rate, even though it's the same word that we wrote here, it doesn't actually connect with this. This is what is known as a local variable. We're declaring it, and it only has the scope of being used between these two curly braces here. So even if we were to store some value into tax rate, even if we were to actually rename this again using the tax rate, if I double click it, it doesn't connect with this one up here. Now this throws an error because it hasn't been created or initialized yet. And if I do tax rate here, now it reconnects with this particular instance of a variable that we've made. And we'll come to understand this a little bit more in depth, and I'll explain it each time we use it until you really kind of grasp it. But for now, what we're doing is storing into our tax charge whatever the result of this method is. In this case, we're returning the double value, which is subtotal times tax rate. So finally, we need to add our subtotal and the tax that we're getting charged together. And to do that, we're going to make one more method. And so we're going to take total, and we're going to store inside of it calculate total. And we want to send it the subtotal again, and the tax charge. And once again, we haven't made this method. So I'm just going to go down here, and all of this has to happen outside of our main method, of course. You can't nest methods inside of each other. We want to do public static double, and we'll say calculate total, which is the name of our method. It's going to take a double called subtotal and another double called tax charge. Now, this can get a little confusing, but just to reiterate, this subtotal is not the same as this subtotal. All of these are highlighted because they are the same, but this one is not. This is a local variable. So once again, we want to return subtotal plus tax charge. And now let's just print out all of our information. System.out.println, and say the subtotal before tax is, And since this is going to be monetary value, I'll put a $sign. And now we want to concatenate our subtotal. Now I'll use that shortcut SYSO, control spacebar. The tax rate, because maybe they want to know what it is. And we'll say tax rate. Now notice I used the underscore inside of my variable name. That is perfectly legal to do inside of Java, so feel free to use it if you need to split up your words. And I'm just going to concatenate and let them know that this is going to be a percent. So since it's a decimal value, I want to convert it to a percent for them. And rather than do a separate method or a separate calculation, I'll do this right in line, but we want to be sure to nest it inside parentheses so that they're associated together. So for that, we're going to do the tax rate decimal times 100, and that's going to make it a percentage value. And let me just clean up this. Okay. SYSO again. The tax charged is, again, this is a monetary value, and we're going to add tax charge to the end of that string. And then finally, the total amount due, put a $symbol, and again, just put our total. Now we'll save it, we'll go up here and we'll run it, and you can see the subtotal before tax is $36.72. The tax rate is 7.35%. The tax charged is 2.698. Now, we have this long decimal, which we wouldn't really want to display in a real-world situation for money, unless, of course, you're at the gas station. But there's ways of handling this and formatting it, and we'll get into that in a later tutorial. But for now, we'll just leave it as it is. And finally, the total amount due is $39.41, well, we would probably round up here, so 42 cents. And so there you have your first series of tutorials related to creating our first basic programs in Java. And in the next tutorial, we'll pick up where we left off and start creating a little bit more in-depth programming.